Welcome to the program, and thanks for choosing Ultra. I'm David Lequire. We're going to build a 4R70W today. It's a very easy unit to rebuild. We're going to cover some of the common areas and common failures on these transmissions on the disassembly. So let's get started disassembling the unit. We want to get everything off the outside of the unit to get started. So I've removed the two 10mm bolts from the neutral safety switch that just slips off. I'm going to take an 8mm, remove the bolt, remove the speed sensor. This speed sensor is an output speed sensor. It only has one ring on it, which indicates it's a 2001 or later. If it had two O-rings on the sensor, it would indicate that it was from like 97 to 2000. That's how you identify a speed sensor. I'm going to take an 11mm, remove the other speed sensor from the tail housing. If you go ahead and remove the tail housing, it's really difficult to get the seal out, so it's still attached to the transmission. I'm going to go ahead and remove the seal. I'm going to remove the 6 13mm bolts that holds the extension housing to the case. We removed the last bolt. This extension housing is broken. It needs to be replaced. The case looks okay. Just the housing's broken. Remove the gasket. The case connector, which comes out from the inside, we're going to remove. It's broken. It needs to be replaced as well. We always replace these connectors anyway. We're going to remove the pump seal from the pump. Get it out of the way. These bolts that hold the pump in are 10mm. We're going to remove those. I've removed all the 10mm pan bolts. This pan's damaged. We're going to have to replace it. It's caved in, crushed. Don't see a lot of damage in this. This small amount of wear on the magnet, that's normal. It does need a pan. I'm going to remove the filters. Just pulls out. Notice how this pan's cut out for this filter with the little pipe on it to go down in. I've seen this a lot where somebody will replace the filter and they put the flat filter, the filter that don't have the pickup pipe, and ends up with a burnout transmission. So if your pan has the cutout area in the bottom, be sure that you put the correct filter back in. Get the pan gasket out of the way. We're going to remove the bonded wiring harness. It's a solid harness with the clips. We just want to pop it up where it connects to the switches. You could reuse this, but we elect not to. It just snaps on all of the switches where it goes in. The older 4R70s had just regular wiring harness. 1998 up has the hard harness, called hardwire. I'm going to take an 8, remove the spring clip that holds the part holder. I'm going to remove the bolt and clip that holds electronic pressure control in. I'm just going to go around the outside and remove all the outer bolts right now, all of the 8mm. We've loosened all the 8mm bolts on the outside of the unit. Now there's some scattered on the end. The rest of these are 10s that holds the plate on the valve body. So just remove all of the 8s on this plate, and then the valve body you can remove. We've got a 10mm bolt, one that holds the TCC switch and the shift solenoids in. So we're going to remove that bolt. Short 10mm. I'm going to lift the shift solenoids off, which we're going to replace. The screwdriver, pop it up. and then we're going to pull the TCC switch out. And the TCC switch, it's important, goes in first, and this plate sits on top of it. You don't want to reverse that. You don't want this sitting on top of that. That'll move the tolerance away, it goes down into the bore. We're just going to leave all of our bolts in the valve body for now till we get to the valve body portion of it. So we're just going to reach to get it, pick it up, and move it out of the way. This is the case connector. We're going to take a hammer, tap it out, just pulls out. Take a pick, remove the 2-3 accumulator plate, and the 2-3 accumulator spring is broken. Common problem in these. 98 up has the formed 2-3 accumulator. You always want to replace all the accumulators. This is the reverse accumulator, the overdrive accumulator, and the 1-2 accumulator. The pump filter just sets in the case, so take it out. We're going to have to remove the linkage to get the electronic pressure control out, but we need to put a seal in here anyway. We're going to remove the reverse accumulator cover, take the reverse servo out. We just need a sharp pick for that. We're just going to come in behind the snap ring, pry out on it, catch it, and lift up. Reverse accumulator cap, snap ring, and the servo. It's formed, solid bonded. It's hard, not pliable, so we want to replace it. We'll reuse the stock spring, but we'll replace this. You need a good pair of internal snap ring pliers to remove the overdrive servo. So we're just going to come in, catch it in the grooves. I've got it compressed together, but we need to tap it down on it to get it to pop out. See how that started it out? Just take a screwdriver, walk this snap ring out. There's a good size spring under this, so it comes out with quite a bit of force. All one piece accumulator. Again, it's hard. The seals should be soft and pliable, and we're going to reuse the spring on that and the snap ring. The 1-2 accumulator and cap, same thing. Internal snap ring pliers, catch it into 2 locks, take a screwdriver, pop up on it. Okay, kind of popped out on us a little bit more than a 1-2. Here's the top spring. Here's the cap, which is bonded. We're going to replace the cap as well as the 1-2 accumulator. The yellow spring sits on top. Reach in and get the accumulator. It has 2 bonded surfaces on it. It sits like this. And the snap ring sits on top. Okay, there's another spring down here. The green longer spring goes in the bottom of the accumulator. You don't want to get those mixed up. Short one always goes next to the cap. Longer spring goes in the bottom of the accumulator. Okay, we need to get the linkage out to get the electronic pressure control out. I'm going to take a pair of cutters, get the roll pin out. Just going to drop down, catch it, lift it up. Need to move this back so we can get a 13/16 wrench in there. remove the linkage. There's one piece. Now we can get the EPC out so we can replace it. And you always want to note which way your lever is turned before you remove this. This lever's turned up toward the top of the transmission. Now that we got this out, we'll clean it up good before we put it back in. Get the nut out, put it back on, keep track of it. Get this seal out, so we're just going to take a big screwdriver, reach in behind it, pop it out. Okay, we've got the seal out, we're ready to pull the pump out. Two of these pump bolt holes are threaded. Just take standard 1/2-inch thread bolts. You can use a slide hammer, but this works just as well. Take a regular pry bar like you would buy at a hardware store. Set it on the side of the case. Come under the bolt. Lift. Go over to the other side. See the pump jump up? Pulls right out. Okay, I'm going to take a crooked pick, reach in, get the intermediate clutches and steels. You can see where the intermediate clutch steel has burn marks on it where these clutches have been slipping. And the last plate is the apply plate, the thick one that we're going to reuse. Now we're going to reach in and get the forward drum, the reverse drum, and the band all pops out together. And as you can see, the band's pretty burnt. Going to pick the reverse drum up, has a ratchet sprag on it. There's a Torrington bearing between the forward drum and the reverse drum. Get the forward drum out of the way. This is the race to the forward drum. It sits down on it. There's a Torrington bearing in here. There's also a Torrington bearing that sits on the shell under it. The part with the little land on it goes down. The flat side goes against the race. Going to reach in and get the shell. This is a problem area on a 4R70. The weld breaks on some of these and it lets this shell slip, so you always want to feel to make sure it looks like it's still attached, but it will spin in there. If you don't look at it carefully, you'll overlook that. I always replace this shell. And then they want to wear in the teeth on the shell where it goes into the reverse drum. Okay, there's a snap ring in here that holds the center support in. It's going to reach and get it, pick up on it. There's a little area to grab hold of it. I'm going to take a hook pick, reach in this corner, and get the bang clip, pull it out. This is under our snap ring. purpose of this, it sticks back in like this and the snap ring goes over it. The center support wants to move from forward to reverse or downshifting. That spring's just a cushion spring that sits in here, so you drop it in reverse, you don't get a big bang like the older cars used to do. We're going to take the hook pick again. We need to get to the center support off of the low sprag. The sprag race is on the center support that goes to the low sprag. So this notch that's cut out in it for this band pin, I'm going to take the hook pick, reach in under it, and lift on it. Just shake it. Okay. You can see it jumped out of the sprag, so we're going to reach in with both hands, pick it up. See the sprag race goes in the sprag in the low planet. Going to reach in with two hands, pick up the low planetary with the sprag. We're going to inspect all of this good on the reassembly. Going to reach in and get the reverse band, pull it out. Okay, there's a snap ring that just lays on the groove down in here. And its purpose is for that band to sit on so it don't rub the ring gear to the low planet. I'm just going to pick it up out of there, get it out of the way. Okay, I'm going to reach in and get the direct drum. It just picks up out of there. There's a Torrington bearing that sits on the bottom of it. This is one of the most common failures on a 4R70, is the direct drum fails. I'm going to reach in and get the output shaft and the ring gear to the low planet. Picks up out of the case. We have one more, the largest Torrington bearing in here, which is beveled, goes down, is the last thing we have in the case. We want to remove the ring gear from the output shaft. Reach in behind the snap ring, pop it out. Pulls right out. We've got two sealing rings that goes to the direct drum. They're cut rings. We want to take those out. We want to inspect this shaft for wear. We've got three metal rings here on the output shaft that seals in the case when it drops down in. We want to look at the ring gear, look at all the teeth to the rear planet. It looks good. Okay, we talked about the direct drum, and it sits on the output shaft. Those sealing rings is where it gets its supply pressure. This drum is really bad to wear where those rings go in there, so you want to check that real good. And if it's got wear in there, you can feel grooves, you want to replace this drum. We'll pull the clutches out of it, get the snap ring out, just turn the drum over. We've got a spacer plate that sits on here first, then a Torrington bearing that sits on the spacer, and then the ring gear that all sits on. These clutches look good, they're not burned out, which we are going to replace them. we need to press these springs down to get the piston out of this drum to install new seals on them. We want to check the splines in this drum. We want to use the stem that we took out of it. We want to put it in there and make sure it fits tight. Feels good. The other end of this stem goes into the bottom of the forward drum. Always want to check that, make sure that's tight. And we was looking at the shell earlier, talking about how they can break around the weld. You want to try to turn it, you want to look, make sure there's no wear, no cracks. Looking at the teeth on the shell where it goes into the reverse drum. Here, this one is tight. A lot of these shells will slot out in there to where it's got a lot of play. Low planet, we want to turn, look at all the gears, make sure there's no damage, no wear, no movement side to side. We'll look at the bushing in there. There's a Torrington bearing down in the bottom. Want to make sure it's good. Got a brass washer we're going to replace here. And then we've got the Sprague element, the one-way clutch. And the center support is the race to it. When you set it on, you want to turn it counterclockwise to get it to drop in. It turns counterclockwise, locks clockwise. We're going to replace this Sprague. The reverse drum has a ratchet Sprague, a one-way Sprague. We're going to replace that. We're going to remove this snap ring, just slides off. We'll get to that in a reassembly. We want to get the clutches out and have a look at them. I'm just going to take a sharp pick, pop the snap ring out, reach in, get the clutches, the apply plate, which has a beveled edge on it that goes down to set on this plate. Our pressure plate on top only goes one way. We don't need a press to get this drum apart. Most Fords are like this. See the end of the snap ring? We're just going to force a sharp pick in there. Come in behind it, the edge of the end of the snap ring, pick it up out of there. Just use my fingers, raise up on it. I want to walk it around. Pops out. See how this ring is a wavy spring that holds that in? It's got a wave to it. Reach in, get the apply plate. And there's a metal spring that separates the aluminum. It just sets on here. It's just so this will be metal against metal rather than touching aluminum. We just want to get the ring out. Just a metal spacer ring that sits there. Take a magnet, pick it up off of there. Then we're going to reach in and pull the piston out. This has two bonded seals in it. They're not a lip seal. They're just a solid square seal. Take those out. We're going to reuse the piston and the drum. Now on the forward drum and the direct drum, we're going to have to use the press. We'll go ahead and remove these clutches though on the forward drum. I'm going to pick it up, dump everything out. Forward drum always starts with a wavy plate, then a steel, then a clutch, steel, so on, and ends with the pressure plate. These clutches look pretty good too, but we need to press this down with a press, remove the snap ring to get this piston out, and it'll have lip seals on it, so will the direct drum. And it's a good idea to put your clutch sets and snap rings together so you don't get them mixed up. Okay, I brought the front pump back over. We've got an O-ring that seals the pump to the case. We're going to get that out because in this groove we've got 4 metal rings on the pump that seals. And then our plastic washer, we'll get it out of the way. Okay, our intermediate piston is right here that sits on the back of the pump. That applies the intermediate clutch. We want to take a pick and just lightly lift up on this cage lock. There's 3 of those tabs. Use a screwdriver, that works a little better. Okay, we removed our spring lock, set it back down, reach and get the intermediate piston. It has 2 lip seals and the seals face down where they go in here. I'll get it up close to where you can see the lip. The lip on the inside faces down as well. I'm going to take those out to replace. Now we want to take the pump apart to see the pump gears. And one of the other areas, problem areas with these transmissions, is be sure and check inside the pump here for wear. That's where the forward drum, these 2 sealing rings, set down in here. And like the direct drum we were talking about in the bottom, if you feel wear in here, replace this pump stator. This half is called a stator. So we'll remove these 10mm bolts. So we got the bolts out. We're just going to reach and get the stator, pick it up. It looks smooth. I don't see any wears. The bushing looks good. Down inside looks good where it sits on the forward drum. We also put new pump gears in these. See a little wear on them. Not a lot, but if you're going to completely build, you want to replace the gears. And you want to look at the pump. You want to replace the pump bushing, which knocks out in this direction. New one drives in from this direction. Okay, we brought the press over, which is just a universal press to press clutch packs apart, available from the parts supplier that we provided you. We're going to set the forward drum in here, bring the press around, set it down, line it up pretty well even, tighten it up on the back, compress the snap ring down. Take a pair of snap ring pliers, come in there, open the snap ring, got it popped up, take a screwdriver, roll it out. Get the pressure off of the spring. Got our plate, the big spring. Reach in and get the piston. It has lip seals on it. Lip seals always lip down. We're going to remove those. These are old. They're real stretchy. Okay, we're going to bring the direct drum back. Line it up to where the snap rings, where we can get the pliers in it with the press. Turn it around. Set it on. Space it up pretty well even. Compress the snap ring. Well, compress the plate to the snap ring. Take the snap ring pliers. Snap ring comes right out. Release the pressure. Use the tool. Take the spring cage plate out. Reach in, get the piston. Okay, one of the lip seals that faces down is in this, and the other one is in the drum, but it faces down, so I've got this one out. This one easily slides over it. So we want to take a pick, stab it in. I'm going to bring this out the way it was in there so you can see it, without trying to keep him twisting it. Okay, it's a lipped seal, but the lip went down on the drum. We'll go over this in detail when we put new seals. We're going to clean everything up now. We need to take the valve body apart, but we need to get some of this cleaned up. You can wash these parts with a pressure washer. You can use a parts washer, as long as you air dry everything good and re-lubricate it. Now you want everything to be clean. Okay, we brought the valve body back, and earlier we took the switches off. One of our bolts are in there, and we want to remember that the TCC switch goes in first. We don't want that tolerance difference. We're just going to take all the eighths out. Now we need to remove all of the tins. These two bolts are sort of like guide bolts. They come all the way through the plate. So we want to remove those. You can see they have the pin on the end of them where they come through. That's these two. Those are the only two bolts like this. And if you think you'll have trouble remembering where they go, just mark them, put an X on it, scratch it in the metal. Now we're going to remove all of the 10mm that holds the valve body plate on. Okay, these are all the same length, the 10s. Removed all of those. Just going to reach and get this plate. Comes right off. We're going to reuse this supply plate, this pressure plate. Get this gasket off. trying to stick, so if you put a scraper under there with it, usually it comes off better and a lot less gasket scraping. A little bit of scraping left, but not much. Get rid of the old gasket. Now under this side of the valve body there's no check balls, there's nothing that's going to fall out. We need to roll the valve body over and remove these plates, which are 10mm bolts, which are the same bolts that was on the other side. Some of them has a third plate here, the later models. And then we've got one bolt over here by itself. And it too is the same. All of these tins are the same. Okay, we're going to reuse the channel plate. We just want to remove the valve body gaskets from it. The one with the 3 holes, this is the case gasket. This is the valve body gasket. It goes against the valve body. We're going to remove it, clean the plate up good. Okay, we want to remove the check balls from the valve body. They're rubber. Your kit, depending on the year of the vehicle, tells you check ball locations on a diagram that comes in the master kit or the banner kit or paper rubber kit, whatever you choose to get. We've got a little filter screen right here you always want to replace. This sits in here catty cornered right there. We're going to wash this when we wash everything else. We're going to wash it, dry it, re-lubricate it thoroughly, and check all the valves. And we get everything cleaned up, we'll come back and start reassembling the unit. Alright, let's have a look at all the parts that goes into this unit. We talked about in the teardown how the shell breaks around the weld, so we replaced this shell with a new one. The shell wasn't broken, but it's a good idea, common failure, to replace it. We replaced the direct drum because of wear inside where the rings ride on the output shaft. We got a new paper rubber ring and seal kit. There's directions in here, all the torque specifications, updates, upgrades. We have a complete set of frictions and steels, the high energy type. We got all the accumulators, the reverse, overdrive, 1, 2, new springs, caps, 2, 3, direct accumulator with spring. It was broken on the teardown. We got all the electronics, output speed sensor, EPC, TCC. We got a new speedo that goes in the tail housing. We have new pump gears for the pump. We had a broken tail housing, so we got a new extension housing. Comes with a new bushing and a new seal already installed. New filter. New overdrive and low reverse band. Pump bushing. And a new hardwire wiring harness. You always want to replace everything in the unit. You don't want to overlook little things like the accumulators. They may look good, but if you want a good quality job, replace everything. Okay, let's get started reassembling the unit. Okay, we've got all of our parts washed and cleaned. We've opened up the paper, rubber, ring, and seal kit. The paperwork that comes with the kits, the first page explains all the valves in the valve body, what the valves are, the placement of them, the retainer clips. Second page shows check ball locations, tolerances, torque specifications, just a lot of good information here. Identification of the correct gasket. So we're going to get into the ring kit. Open it up. Dump them all out. We want to find the two solid Teflon rings that goes on the forward drum. Bring it over. They're a solid ring. There's two of them in here that goes on. They're not a cut ring. We're going to take a pick to remove the old ring. We're just going to stab it in, break the ring. We're just going to break the solid Teflon ring. We're going to break them both. Instead of buying a special tool installer, we can simply just work these two rings on and use the pump stator to resize it. The pump stator is beveled, so it'll go down to resize the ring. So I'm just going to walk this ring on. We're going to put them on one at a time. I don't want to twist it. I just want to walk it in. Then I'm going to take my fingers and form it back. I'm going to lube up the ring. Lube the inside of the pump stator. Beveled edge. Just going to take this stator until it sits down on the new ring to resize it. There it goes. Resized. Want to inspect it to make sure we didn't cut it. Looks good. I'm going to put the stator back on it. Let it set for a few minutes, so we're sure that it's resized completely, and then we'll do the other ring exactly the same. Okay, we've got the ring kit opened up. So we've found the three metal rings that goes on the output shaft to seal in the case. They have a clasp on them that just clasps together. So we want to remove the old ones. Just unlock it, slide them off. Okay, we're going to bring the new rings up in place. Stretch them open. Lock it in the groove. Push down right here. Walk it around. Locked. Now we got a new direct drum. We've got two rings that goes on here. They're cut rings. I'm going to apply trans gel in the grooves. I like to use the green, it's a little thicker. Take the new cut ring. Form it in the groove. Make sure that the scarf cuts go together correctly when they overlap. You want to take the new direct drum, test fit it on there. Okay, we're going to assemble the direct drum. We've got the piston cleaned up. You've got the lip seal and the small lip seal that goes in the drum. We're going to put the lip seal on the piston first. Lip always faces down. Just roll it around, form it on. Then we're going to take the small lipped seal with the lip facing down. We need to stretch it all the way down into this bottom groove in the drum. So I'm just going to take it. I want to be careful not to roll it. Okay, I've got it formed back into place in the drum. Looks good. We want to lubricate the seal. Want to lubricate the inside of the drum good. I'm using STP. You can use trans gel. I'll lube the inside of the piston. Lube the lip seal. Okay, there's two ways we can put this in. We can take a lip seal installer tool, go around the outside of it, just press gently, drops right in. I'm going to take the piston back out because you can get a seal tool installer that's plastic, works really neat. You just slide the piston into it, set it in the drum, press down, drop straight in. You can get these for pretty much any application, any drum, or you can do it the old-fashioned way with a lip seal tool. I'm going to replace the springs, sets on the pins. Move back over to the press. Press it down. Get the snap ring. Catch it in the snap ring pliers. Drop it in, open it up. Snaps right in. Release the press. Verify that your snap ring's locked in good all the way around. Looks good. Alright, we've got a spacer that goes next. It's cut out to sit on the snap ring. So we're going to, and it's flat on the top side. So we're going to set it on the snap ring. And then the flat side of the bearing sits on the spacer. Then we're going to set the hub on that. I've got the 6 clutches that go into direct drum. I've got the new steels. We want to start with a steel, then a clutch, steel, clutch. We're going to continue this process until we have all 6 clutches in the drum. And this is number 6. Take the pressure plate, set it back on the top. You see the clearance that we have where the snap ring is. It's pretty well level with the top. That's pretty much where we want to be. We're going to replace the snap ring. I'm going to take a feeler gauge, and we've got this feeler gauge set on 32 thousandths, and it's a snug fit. We have a bearing that goes on the bottom of this drum. The flat side goes towards the bottom of the drum. The side with the taper turns down. Put a little trans gel on it to hold it in place. Pick up the drum, set it on the bottom. And we're going to bring our output shaft back with the rings on it. We want to put it on there with the washer, and we want to air check it to make sure it applies correctly. We have 2 feed holes, but we want the top feed hole that feeds this clutch pack. So we're just going to take an air gun, shoot air in the hole. I'm going to stand it up so you can see the clutches apply. See how it applies and holds. I'm going to bring the ring gear back to the low planet. Take the shaft, set it back down in the groove, replace the snap ring. We got the low planet assembly. We've checked all the gears, we checked the bearing inside, we checked the bushings. Everything looks really good. We set the sun gear in, checked it. Everything looks good, so we're ready to install the new low sprag assembly. So we're just going to be gentle with it, set it on. Only goes in one way. If you got it turned over, it won't go in. We're going to take the center support, set it on it to check it. I'm going to turn the center support counterclockwise. And this one-way clutch turns counterclockwise, locks clockwise. Okay, we're going to bring back the forward drum. We installed the new rings on here, the solid Teflon rings. Set it in. Going to get the piston. It goes back in. We've got 2 lip seals that goes in here. Lip always goes down. So we'll put the inner one in first. Form it up. Put the outer one on. Lip down. You can't get this backwards. If you try to put the lip this way, it just won't go. It just rides up on here, so it'll only go one way. Just going to walk it in. I'm going to lube up the inside of the drum. Going to lube up the inner seal and the outer seal. Set it on, kind of twist it a little. We're not pushing on it. You don't want to flare the lip of the seal out. We want to start with the inner seal first. Get it started. Walk it around a couple of turns. Turn it a little. Then we want to get on the outside of the seal. We want to walk it around. I'm not just pushing just a little. I'm going to twist it a little. I'm going to go back and check the inner one again. I'm going to twist and push. Sometimes you have to fool with it for a little while, but then it'll just walk in. You want to be gentle with it though. You don't want to just stab and push. You don't want to cut the seal. Bring the spring back, the retainer, compress it down. I want to compress it down far enough to where we can get the snap ring back in the groove. Same thing as the other drum, bring back the snap ring, set it on, catch it in the snap ring pliers right on the tip, open it up. Press it down with your fingers. Tap it, make sure it's seated good. I'm going to bring it up and look at it and make sure snap ring is behind all 4 tabs, that it's locked properly. This drum holds 5 clutches, 5 steels. The reverse drum clutches and the forward drum clutches look almost identical. But if you hold them up and put them exactly together, the forward clutches are just a little bit larger. in diameter. It would fit in here, but it's the wrong clutch. You identify the forward drum clutches by the black marks. These don't have the mark. For all kits, the forward drum has the black mark. All forward drums in the Ford starts with a wavy plate. We're reusing this. Drop it in. Go steel, clutch, steel, clutch. We're just going to repeat the process until we get a total of 5 clutches, 5 steels. Okay, here is the final clutch. We're going to bring back our pressure plate. Flat on one side, beveled on the other. Set it on. Look at the tolerance. You see it's really close to the snap ring. That's what we want. Reinstall the snap ring. Going to bring back our feeler gauge on 32 thousandths. You see what a really snug fit that is. And anywhere from 30 to 45 thousandths is acceptable, but I like 32. We're going to air check this drum on the pump when we reassemble the pump. We'll air check the reverse drum on the pump as well. Okay, we brought the reverse drum back with the ratchet sprag on it. We're going to replace this sprag. Something I failed to mention in the parts layout, that we are replacing the sprags. So we just want to take a good pair of snap ring pliers, open it up, get the raise up, bring it off. The ratchet just picks up, comes off. See how the ratchet's spline, where the spline's on the drum. Bushings look good. This bushing's new, we put in. Anytime you drive a bushing in, you drive it out from one direction with a screwdriver or a punch. Drive it back in a little past flush, and then always test fit it to make sure it's not too tight. Okay, here's our new ratchet. I'm going to just drop it back in place of the old one. Reinstall the snap ring. Now they make a snap ring that's a spiral ring that I like better, but we're not using it on this unit today. But the spiral ring works really well too. Stretch the ring over. Locked. Okay, we're going to flip the drum over. Lubricate the inside of the drum good. Gonna get the piston. We've got 2 flat seals. They're not lip seals, they're just a regular cut seal that goes in here. Walk it in. Put the inner one in. Walk it around good to make sure it's seated good. Lube both seals. Okay, sometimes you can press it in with your fingers, sometimes you have to tap it in. I'm going to work it from side to side. Bell right in. Remember the spacer that sets in the groove so we don't have a steel plate setting against the aluminum. It just lays back in the groove. The plate drops in on top of it, the pressure plate. Then we had the big wavy ring. We're going to reach down, get it started, and walk it around to get it back down in there. And then we're going to have to take a hammer to seat it. You got to drive it back in place. First, want to get it down in place before we start trying to hammer it back in where it goes. Okay, see how this side locked? Take a hammer and a screwdriver, tap it. See how that snapped in? Turn it around to where it's popped up again. See how that ring is going back into the groove where it goes? You have to walk it around. Then this side, the last part of the wavy. Then we want to go around it again, just to tap it. Be sure that it's seated all the way back. Okay, look at this. Now our starter plate is beveled to sit on this plate. If we don't have this ring completely in, when we set this starter plate down, it will be one-sided. It won't set flat. Then you know you need to knock your snap ring in some more. So we're going to start with the starter plate, a clutch, a steel, clutch, steel, and a clutch. Then we're going to get the pressure plate beveled on one side, flat on the other, flat side down. Drop it in. We're going to look at the snap ring tolerance here. You see that's pretty well level with the top of the snap ring, which looks good. We're going to replace the snap ring back into the drum. We're going to bring the feeler gauge back, 32 thousandths. Nice tight fit. Something I should have mentioned, we were talking about the forward clutches being larger than the reverse clutches, but they had the same teeth. The forward steels are a little bit larger as well. You want to separate those out. Find the smaller ones that go in the reverse drum. The larger ones go into the forward drum with the clutches with the black stripe on them. Okay, we've got our pump all cleaned up. So you notice the bushing is flush and it's down an eighth or so on the back side. We want to drive this bushing out with a bushing driver the same size. We're just going to take a hammer, drive it all the way through, drive it out. And we're going to turn it over, set the new bushing in. The Oiler slot goes down. Take a larger bushing driver, set it in. We'll turn it over just for demo. I don't want to beat on it on the video here. Set a bushing driver on, take a hammer, knock it in till it's flat on the front side. And then you want to test it on the converter to make sure it's not too tight. Okay, we have new pump gears to go in the pump. We're going to drop the outer gear in. Now this gear is tapered where it goes into the torque converter. This side is flat. So the tapered side goes down. So when the torque converter comes in, through the front, it'll be going into the tapered area of the pump. Okay, our stator's cleaned up, checked. We're just going to set it back on the pump. We're going to rotate it around. We line the bolt holes. They're all lined up. Okay, we put the 5 10mm bolts back in. We've torqued them all at 18 foot-pounds. Check those. We're ready to put the piston back in. So we need to get the 2 remaining lip seals. An inner and an outer. Same thing. Lip always down. Start it in the groove. Walk it around. Then we've got the inner lip seal, which we want to start in there. walk it around. Okay, I've got them in, so I'm just going to kind of spin it around, form them. Going to lube everything up. Going to lube the inside of the pump housing for the intermediate piston to go in. Going to lube the two seals good. Okay, now this notch. Here's the feed portion of the pump. These two holes. All 4R70s, AODEs, 4R75s has got a notch stamped right here at the 1 o'clock position. If you look at your piston, there's a drain back hole right here. This hole has to line up with that hole at the 1 o'clock position from the bottom. If you turn it around and you put it down here at the bottom, you'll have a delayed 2 to 3 shift, because it'll drain back. It won't keep the piston charged. So just bear in mind to always line the hole up with this hole in the casting. So we're going to set it on there. Take the lip seal installer tool. Start with the inside. Walk it around. A couple of turns. Start on the outside. I'm not pushing, I'm just holding. Okay, I want to work it back and forth. Fell right in. Okay, now here's where we're doing a double check. Line this hole up with that hole. Okay, the caged retainer springs just has the little spring tab locks on it. We want to line up the 3 springs in each one with the 3 holes. Doesn't matter really which way it turns as long as it's in the slots. And we just want to reach and get it, snap down on it. Locks right back in place. We got a new case to pump, sealing O-ring. This goes in this groove. Want to put that on. We're going to lube that up good before we put it back in the case. Now, that leaves the sealing rings. These 2 are for the reverse drum. These 2 are for the forward drum. They're clasp rings, like the rings that we put on the output shaft. So we want to just hold, unlock them, bring them off. And you can see these rings are worn quite a bit. They're shiny, they're sharp. They will cut you too. So be careful with them. So we're going to replace these out. We got these 2 with the new ones in the kit. The new top 2 are gray. The new bottom 2 are black. But they all 4 clasp together. The same as the ones that were on the output shaft. Okay, we've got the 4 sealing rings installed, the clasp rings. They're on our pump. We're going to bring back our plastic washer. We put some trans gel on it. There's a slot here that this notch goes in. Sit down in the groove. We put a little trans gel on both sides so it'll be lubricated. We talked about earlier we're going to check the drums. The first hole beside the 2 main pressure holes, this applies in between the 2 sealing rings for the reverse drum. So we're going to set it on. Take an air gun and we're going to apply air to this drum. And our drum applies and holds good. Set it off. Going to bring back the forward drum. It's going to get its feed pressure between these two sealing rings in here. So we're going to drop it on. The apply feed hole to that is the third hole over. So we're going to shoot it. Applies good. And then the last hole applies the intermediate clutch piston. So you want to just put just a tiny bit of air pressure to it, because you'll blow the piston out. Because there's nothing to retain it until it's put in the transmission case. But to check it, you can just lightly shoot it. You can see it moving. Okay, that pretty well covers the assembly of the drums and the pump and the sprags. So we need to get the case back up and start assembling the parts back into the case of the transmission. Okay, we've got our case cleaned up. I always like to paint my case before I start reassembling it. I put the pan back on, stick the pump half back in to make sure we don't get any overspray paint inside of anything. But I want to put the selector shaft seal in before we put it on the stand. The flat part's out. Set it in. Take a hammer and tap it in. Okay, the first thing back in the case is the biggest bearing. Tapered in, goes down, sits on the land. Alright, I've lubricated the rings on the output shaft with our rear hub. And then I'm going to grab it in between the two rings so I don't mess the rings up as I set it back down into the transmission. Have the direct drum with the bearing installed. Set it back down in the drum on its rings. We have this small snap ring that just sits on this groove. Something for the band to sit on. It just drops in, sits down flush. We take the band, locate these two tabs, sits on these two tabs. I'm going to drop it in. And you see how this sets on that snap ring. Keep this from dragging this hub. We're going to take the rear planet, pick it up from the inside, drops through the band, give it a spin. We want it to spline down in this direct drum. Dropped in. Take the sun gear, flat part of the bearing goes down, taper part turns up, set it in. We're going to replace the input stem to the forward drum. Sits down in the low planet. Then we're going to bring the center support back. We've lubricated the bushing and the outer part of the race. We're going to locate the notch that goes past the pin to align it, to put it in. Just going to drop it down. Set it on the sprag. Then I'm going to reach inside and spin the planet. Drops right in. Bring the bang clip back. We talked about, just takes the noise out of it. Doesn't matter which way it turns, it's the same on each end. I'm just going to take it, hold it straight, and push it back down in the case low enough to where the snap ring will go over to retain it in there. I'm going to bring back the snap ring. It's got grooves on each end. If you note how the opening is in the case, that's how the snap ring has to go back in. So we're just going to take it over here, start it, push it down, and verify that it did go over our bang clip and lock in completely. If this was a 4R75W, there would be another speed sensor up on this side, and you would want to make sure that this snap ring opening didn't block the hole where the speed sensor came through. 4R70 just has the one output speed sensor though. It's basically, that's about the only difference between a 70 and a 75 is another speed sensor. We're going to bring our new shell back. Has the ring gear on it. Goes down in the planetary. And this bearing is what this shell sits on down there. So we're just going to drop it in. Splines right in. I'm going to bring the hub back to the forward drum. We have two bearings. One bearing has a land on it. This is the one that turns down, flat side up, that sits on the shell. Flat part sits on here, and then the other bearing, the flat side sits in the groove. The part that turns up. If you turn it over the other way, it's distorted, so that's pretty simple on that. I'm going to bring the forward drum back. It's all built up, good to go. We're just going to set it on. We want to spline the clutches down onto that hub. So I'm going to lock onto it with a pair of vice grips, and you hear it drop. I just rattled it down. That's seating that hub into all the clutches. You hear that solid thump? It's completely down. Bring the reverse drum back. We have a bearing that goes in this drum. We put a little trans gel on the lipped area. Sits right here. Hold it on in place. Just going to flip it over. Set it down. Spin it around. Try to get it lined up in the notches on the shell. Same thing. Take the vice grips and just rock it back and forth so it sits down completely. It's down. I can run my finger down in here and I can feel that it's sitting on the bearing on top of the forward drum. We're ready to install the new band. Both ends of the band are the same on these units. So we want to set it in. We would lubricate the band first with some fresh transmission fluid. Lock all the clutches. We didn't soak the clutches for the video because we wanted to make it neater. But you always want to soak your clutches for at least 30 minutes before you install them. And I'm just going to set this back down in place where it goes. We have to reinstall the band pin. See where this screwdriver's coming through? We got to pull it over, put the band servo back in before we continue. Okay, we need to put the overdrive band accumulator in. It's one piece. I've lubricated it. We're going to use the stock spring back in. So I'm just going to set it in the case. I'm going to set it in, get it started, make sure it's not catching. Now this is a big spring, so it takes a lot of pressure to compress it down. So I use a universal, it's like a damper wheel puller, steering wheel puller. I want to take two of the 8mm valve body bolts, and I'm going to catch one across from the other with a washer on it. Raise up the washer, raise up this washer, line it up. Okay, see how that's pushing our band accumulator piston back in? we want to take this in far enough to put the snap ring back in. Now, we're going to have to swing it over though. The pin's coming through. So we got to make sure the band catches that pin. So we want to hold the band over in place as the pin's coming in. Okay, see, I'm holding the band and I'm twisting the accumulator in. See how it has the band firmly on the pin now. We want to feel of it, make sure it's straight, make sure it's in the center of the band pin on both sides. Then we're going to flip it back up, and we just need to get it down far enough to get our snap ring back in. Just take it a little bit more. Okay, you can see the opening here now. Okay, we're going to go back to the internal snap ring pliers. Here's the snap ring that has the notches on it to catch it with the internal pliers. Okay, I'm just going to slide the snap ring over, lay it in place, open the pliers up wide enough to catch it in the two openings, compress it back together. Verify that the snap ring is seated good by tapping it. Looks good, snapped into place. Remove the tool. Double check that it's in good, and it's in and it's locked. Remove the bolts. Now, as you can see, the band pin has the band. I'll put a pair of pliers on it and turn it. Nice snug fit. Okay, we're going to bring back the intermediate starter apply plate, a thick one. See how it's notched out in the groove? That sets in this notch. You go to the wide angle of it, go to the last notch, set it in right here, drops right in. We've got a clutch plate that starts directly on the starter steel, then a steel plate, a clutch, steel, clutch, steel, and then a clutch, and steel. Now, as far as tolerance goes, we want to end pretty well level with this, and we are. You always want to count the old clutches and steels that come out of it to make sure that you got the same amount. I counted the ones we took out, we had 4 and 4. So we're ready for a pump gasket, and then we'll put the pump back in. Okay, I wanted to jump back over before we put the pump back in the transmission, because when you recess down in the case, it's hard to put the seal in the transmission, so it's easier to put it in while it's out here accessible. Ford uses a rubber clad seal, so I always like to use some red thread locker, Loctite on the seal. Just go around it, put a bead of Loctite on it all the way around. Just want to make sure we don't get a seal blowout. Just a little extra security. And while it's up out of the case, seal just taps right in. Get a little excess Loctite run out, we'll just wipe it off. Our washer's on, our O-ring's on. We're going to lube up the O-ring. We're going to lube the rings, the new metal rings that we put on, so they'll slide down into the drum smoothly. And then we want to lube the inside of the pump stator, which is going to go over those solid Teflon rings we put on. We've got everything lubed up. We'll move back over, put the pump gasket in the case, set the pump in. Okay, we want to lube the inside of the case where the pump goes in. We lube the O-ring on the pump. We want to lube everything good. Okay, we've got the new gasket. You see the two pressure apply holes here and here, and then the square hole. Look for the square hole over in this side of the case. Just line it up with the big holes, the slots. Make sure it's on good. This lube we put on there is helping to hold it in place. Make sure it's down nice and flat. I'm going to bring the pump back. The two feed holes, the big ones, are our alignment mark. And we can see those here and here. That's the two big areas on the gasket. So we're just going to set it down. Look down in the case and see that the bolt holes are lined up. Now I want to stick a screwdriver in just to verify that we're lined up good. And then I'm just going to shove down on the pump, both hands. Drops right in. I'm going to put the pump bolts back in. They're 10 millimeter. And to make sure that we're started good in the threads, we can stick a screwdriver here and rock it back and forth. See how it moved back a little bit to let that free up to tighten the bolts up. Okay, we've reinstalled all the 10 millimeter bolts to hold the pump in, and it's very important that you torque these. They torque at 18 foot-pounds. We've already torqued them. You want to go from side to side to torque these. If you don't have a torque wrench, you want to get one. You absolutely need to put the valve body and the pump and everything back to the exact torque specifications. If you over tighten a valve body bolt, you'll stick a valve because the aluminum bends. If you leave it too loose, you're going to lose pressure under the gasket. So you definitely need a torque wrench. These are all torqued to 18 foot-pounds. I'm going to put the vice grips back on the stator. Verify that everything turns smoothly. Okay, we're going to get our other accumulators back in. We're going to start back here at the direct accumulator. We've got new ones. We're going to lube it up good down in the case. Go ahead and lube up the reverse accumulator. Take the new bonded direct accumulator. Just drop it in. It slips right in. The spring was broken. We got the new hardened spring, so we're going to sit it on top. And then we're going to set the retainer plate on top of that. Okay, on the reverse, we're going to use the original spring that was under the old accumulator. We're going to take the new one. We've already lubed it up. Set it in. Now that's contacting our reverse band that we put in there on the two dowel pins. Don't take a lot of pressure to push this down, so we can put that snap ring back in without any sort of a compression tool. Got a new reverse accumulator cap, got it lubed up on the bonded seal. I'm going to set it back on top, start it in, just push it down with our fingers, take the snap ring, pushes right in. Verify that it's locked completely. Okay, we got a new case connector with the wiring harness clips too that comes through to the outside of the case. You always want to replace that. See the notch in it? Sits right here. You want to remember to put this in at this point. I put the valve body on, a lot of them. Forgot to put this in, and then you had to remove the valve body because it sits on it to hold it down. So we're just going to line it up straight. Sits in the case, sits flat on the land. Then when the valve body comes down, it caps over it to hold it in place. We got a new 1-2 accumulator, we got new springs, we got a new retainer cap. Remember, the longer spring goes in first. Going to lubricate the area that it goes in. Lubricated the new 1-2 accumulator. Kind of walk it around till you feel it start in the bottom. Set the new shorter spring on top. Okay, I brought the camera over for a better angle on this accumulator. You can see how it moves up and down. I've lubricated the new cap. Gonna set it on top. See how we need to walk it down that far to get in the snap ring groove. Take the snap ring and the snap ring pliers, come around, go ahead and bend the snap ring in. I want to get this started. We've got it started on this end. Take a screwdriver and walk this ring on down. Snapped right in. Okay, while we're here, we've got our new electronic pressure control. I've lubricated the seals. I'm going to go ahead and stick it back in the case. Pops in. I'm going to take our pump filter, which you can see the way it's notched out in here. It'll just sit in here one way. Just sits there, the valve body holds it down. Okay, we're going to bring our linkage back, all as one piece. I'm going to come back here where the park paw is. I'm going to stick that in. I'm going to drop it down. We've got our linkage lever cleaned up, lubricated. We put a new seal on the outside, and we talked about a Ford will turn either way. It'll go up or it'll go down. And we noted that this lever goes up toward the top of the case. Just going to bring it through. See how it's notched right here on the groove. It goes in the notch on here. Lever turned up. Fits right in the groove. Bring the 13/16 nut back. Now when we tighten this up, we want to make sure that it's locked firmly in the groove. We're going to let it come back, hit this land. We'll take our 13/16 wrench, tighten it up nice and firm. Now we've got a pin that goes in here to keep it from moving in and out. So we just want to drop the pin in, move it back and forth till we find the notch. We don't want to drive that in really hard like with a hammer. We may want to get it back out sometime. We just want to take it in flush. It's got it locked. See how when I turn the shaft, the park paw will apply and lock it. We're ready to move on to start assembly of the valve body and then put the valve body back on the transmission. Okay, we're going to take a look at the bolts that goes in our valve body. We've got two sets of 8mm. One set of them is like a 1/4 of an inch longer than the other set of 8s, and then all of the short 10s are the same length. And then we have two dowel pin bolts, guide bolts, and then we've just left the bolt in, which is one of the longer ones, but we left it in the EPC bracket that retains the electronic pressure control. We've also left the shorter bolt in the park spring. This is the torque converter drain back plunger, which goes in the valve body. We'll go over that. I just wanted to let you take a look at the bolts laid out, go over those, and I'll explain how you keep from getting them confused when we get to the assembly part. Okay, we've got our valve body all washed, cleaned, relubricated, sprayed with WD-40 or equivalent. Check the valves. So we're going to put a new gasket to the plate, back on top. Just sets on. We've cleaned up our plate good, got all the old gasket off. We're going to set it back on. And we're going to start putting our short 10mm bolts in, which we can't get confused on these longer holes. You drop it in, they'll just fall through. So you can see the threads in the bolts that the 10s go in. So we're just going to install all the 10s back in. Now we're going to take the two dowel pin, the alignment bolts, and we put a little mark right here. Just took our pick and scratched it to remember where the dowel pins go. We haven't tightened this yet because we want the dowels to go through. We got one sits here, one goes in the last hole, and it's going to go all the way through the valve body. You can see it raising the valve body up as we're threading it through. Once we get these dowels tightened up, then we'll go ahead and tighten up the rest of the 10s. All of these bolts, all of the 8s and the two dowels torque at 9 foot-pounds. You see how these dowel pins came through. We want to take a screwdriver, just a flat tip, and we want to check all the valves in the valve body to make sure they open and close properly. We've checked all of these. If anything's sticking, then you take the clip out, pull the valve out, clean the valve, put it back in. But normally if you just wash it thoroughly, air dry it, blow it out, spray it, all the valves work good. But you want to double check, make sure. And if you want to know what all of the valves are in the valve body, that comes in all of the kits. That shows you, tells you exactly what every valve is in the valve body. This is your main pressure control regulator. But as long as they're free, they're lubricated, and they look good, then you won't have a problem with them. The torque converter drain back plunger. It drops back in the valve body in this seat. Check ball locations. Shows you where every check ball in the valve body goes. You can pretty well look at it and tell. See the notches cut out for their little round balls. But just to double check, it shows you where they're all located. Learn your paperwork. Check balls in the transmission were rubber. The new ones that come in the kit are fiber. Okay, we'll use the paperwork. We'll lay it like the valve body. And it's showing number 1 is right here. 2. Okay, we got a new screen that goes in the manual control valve right here. And you remember that set caddy cornered in the manual control valve. If you don't remember where that goes, it's also on the paperwork. It says filter on the check ball locations. Shows you exactly where it sits in the case. Now there's 8 check balls. We've installed them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We went by the diagram to know that they're correct. Our paperwork says that the correct valve body gasket for a 1996 through a 2000 has a white stripe. We got 2 gaskets in the kit, and then we got the one with the holes in it. That's the case gasket. They're all the same. And the 2001 up is the light blue stripe. I'm going to get those gaskets. Put them up here together. This is the 2001 up. And you see the biggest difference in the 2 gaskets is right here. This hole is small. This hole is big over the pressure regulator valve. This is where it can get confusing. The transmission that we're working on, stamped on the case, says 2000 on the year model. Our output speed sensor indicates that we have a 2001 or later because we've only got one O-ring. So when we cleaned the gasket off, we took it off carefully. This is the old gasket, and as you can see, has the large hole above the control valve. So even though the case identifies the transmission as being a 2000 model, it is actually a 2001 model. So we're going to use the blue stripe gasket. We've got the check balls in, we've got the torque converter plunger in, the screens in, we've checked all of the valves. These dowel pins, you set the gasket directly on there. We're going to take the channel plate that we've cleaned up, set it on the dowel pins. Go back, we're going to put the one 10mm bolt. We're going to replace the covers back on to the valve body with the other 10mm bolts. There's two of them, some of them has three. If you turn them over and look at the back, they're actually fluid cavities for fluid to travel through. Now you can't turn it wrong because these bolts are offset, so it will only go on one way. So you just spin it around till the bolts are lined up. Okay, all four bolt holes are lined up. I'll put the 4 tins back in here. I'll take the larger one that goes in the middle, and as you see, it has fluid cavities as well, passages. So we're going to look where the 4 bolt holes are. We're going to set it over and lined up. And like I said, if you turn it around this way or that way, it's not going to line up because they're offset. We have 4 short tins remaining. They go in here. We're going to tighten these bolts and the one bolt over here down to 9 foot-pounds. Everything on the valve body is 9 foot-pounds. So now I'm just going to add a nice coat. You can use trans gel. I'm using STP. I want something to stick the gasket to so it'll stay in place. I don't want to use something really thick like a big gob of trans gel because it'll hold it up trying to torque it down. So I'm just putting a light coat of STP on the whole plate. I'll take the remaining gasket with the holes, which is the case gasket, set it in place on the dowel, stick it down good on the gel so when we turn the valve body over to set it on the case, it'll stay in place. Pretty simple valve body to build. We're back over at the case. We've got our EPC in, our filter in. We've verified that everything's in. And this plate for the 2-3, the direct, when the valve body sets on, the valve body holds this in place as well. So I'm going to bring the valve body over. Our gasket is stuck in place firmly on the dowel pins, not going to move. I'm going to take the manual lever, put it in the pin. Sets right on. The first thing that I want to put in is the EPC retainer, which just slides down over the electronic pressure control to keep it from backing out. Bolt goes in. Okay, to make this really simple so you don't get confused, it looks confusing when you got long bolts and short bolts, but it's really not. All of the longer bolts go on the steel plate. All the shorter bolts go outside of the steel plate. So pretty simple. Just remember that. So put all the short ones in the aluminum part of the valve body. Okay, now I've got all the longer bolts. We're just going to drop all of those into the part of the valve body that has the steel plate on it. We're going to set our retainer cage spring back on here. Sits in the little pin. Okay, We put all the bolts in place, but we haven't tightened anything up yet. I've got a new TCC switch. You remember it goes in first. And by the way, we had one short 10mm bolt left, and this is where it goes. We've got the TCC in. Now we need to remove this bolt because it helps retain the shift solenoid. We've lubricated the O-rings. Just going to snap it on, drop that bolt back in. Now we're going to put the last 10mm bolt through the shift solenoid and the TCC. We're going to go back over the valve body and we're going to torque all of the 8s and the 10s to 9 foot-pounds. We're going to start in the middle and work our way out on each side. And we're going to double check it to make sure everything's torqued at 9 foot-pounds. Okay, we've used the torque wrench. We've gone over all of the 8 and 10mm bolts twice, torqued them at 9 foot-pounds to make sure that the torque is correct. We got a new hardwire harness. You can see how each one connects directly onto the switch. So we're just going to set it in place. Going to push it down, lock it onto the case connector. Locks onto the shift solenoids, snapped onto the TCC and the EPC. It's all locked in place. We got a new filter, we've lubricated it. We're just going to set it in place, smack it in. Bring over a new gasket. On the teardown, our pan was damaged, so we've ordered another pan. We put our magnet in it. We're going to set it on. And we're going to put the short 13mm bolts remaining. Torque them down to 13 foot-pounds. Okay, we was talking on the teardown. The 4R70s, 75s with the notch cut out in the bottom of the pan. It's like a 4-wheel drive, even though this is a 2-wheel drive. I was talking about I've seen so much burnout over the wrong filter being installed. Here's the filter that fits this unit. Here's the other filter that's identical except for when you roll it over. This one has an extension pipe, this one's flat. So there's been a lot of transmissions failed over people changing the filter or just put the wrong filter in it that don't have that pickup and it don't get any fluid and burns up. Okay, we're going to put the new extension housing gasket on. We got a new extension housing. Ours was broken. This one already has a new seal, new bushing. Just going to set it on the gasket. Install the 13mm bolts back in to the housing and they torque at 13 foot-pounds. Our unit is nearly complete. There's an O-ring provided that goes on the dipstick. I'm going to spin the unit around. We need to put the speedo back in, and we talked about that. We got a new speedo, but we're going to reuse the gear. So here's the new speedo that goes in. We're going to take the gear from the old one, slide it on, take the retaining clip faces down, snaps in, locked. Put some lube on the speedo O-ring. Speedo has an 11mm bolt, torques at 8 foot-pounds. We replaced the speed sensor, the output speed sensor. We've lubed it up, push it in, 1 8mm bolt, 8 foot-pounds. Okay, the other thing we like on this unit is to install the neutral safety switch or the Prindle, the manual position lever sensor. So I'm going to put it up in neutral. Look at the notch, which lines up. We want the two notches to come together, here and here. With the transmission in neutral, there's a notch on top. I'm just going to slide it on. Replace the two. Okay, our rebuild is complete. I hope you've enjoyed the program. If you have any problems on your build or assembly, feel free to use the free unlimited technical support offered by Ultra. We'll answer any questions that you have. Again, thanks for choosing Ultra. I'm David Lequire. See you next time.